My brother walked into a police station and framed me for stealing from our parents. He didn't realize I do forensic accounting for a living. So I let the investigation play out, then handed the detective the exact IP logs that sent my brother to jail. I live in Denver, Colorado, and I've been entirely financially independent since the day I turned 18. I say entirely because while some kids get their college paid for or a down payment for their first house, my reality was working 35 hours a week at a local credit union while taking a full course load just to afford my rent and textbooks. I paid my own tuition, bought my own used Honda Civic, and graduated without asking my parents for a single dime. My brother Julian is 3 years younger than me, and he is the exact opposite. Julian is the kind of guy who walks into a room and instantly becomes the center of gravity. He's effortlessly charismatic, ridiculously good-looking, and sells high-end commercial real estate for a living. If you met him at a dinner party, you'd probably think he was the most fascinating guy in the world. Most people do. Growing up, Julian was the undeniable favorite. I don't say that with any overwhelming bitterness, okay, maybe a lingering fraction of it, but it's just an objective fact. My mother, Helen, is a retired pediatric nurse. She is fiercely protective and sweet, but she has a blind spot the size of the Grand Canyon when it comes to Julian. Because he was the baby of the family, he was always the one who needed more help, more attention, and more financial bailouts. I was the quiet, hyper-independent one who handled things on my own, so they just assumed I never needed them. My dad, Arthur, is a retired mechanic. He's 67, has a bad heart, and spent his entire life deferring to my mother on all family matters to keep the peace. If my mom said the sky was neon pink, my dad would immediately start looking for a matching paint swatch. Our family isn't the loud, plate-throwing type. We don't have screaming matches on the front lawn. We are the kind of people who let resentment fester quietly in the dark until the rot runs so deep it threatens the foundation of the house. Passive-aggressive text messages, long, deafening silences, and saying, "I'm fine," when absolutely nothing is fine. That is the Pierce family brand. For years, I kept a comfortable, healthy distance. I visited for major holidays, called my mom every other Sunday, and sent thoughtful gifts. I wasn't estranged. I was just separate. I built my own life. I own a nice townhouse, I have a career I love as a senior financial auditor and fraud investigator, and I have a tight circle of friends. Julian, on the other hand, has been circling the financial drain for years, and nobody in the family is allowed to talk about it. He married his wife Chloe 5 years ago. Chloe is 28, runs a failing online luxury boutique, and has champagne expectations on a tap water budget. Last year, they completely gutted and renovated their master bathroom with imported Italian marble. Julian drives a leased Porsche Macan. They spent 2 weeks in the Maldives for their anniversary. From the outside, their life looks like a flawless Instagram feed. But I know what the commercial real estate market in Denver has looked like lately, and I know what a mid-tier agent actually takes home. It is good money, but it is absolutely not Porsche plus Maldives plus imported marble money. Not without a massive influx of outside cash. But I minded my own business, because that is what I do. I need to give you one specific piece of context before I explain how my life blew up. Last Thanksgiving, I was at my parents' house, sitting at the dining table. Julian walked in late, wearing a brand new Rolex Submariner. I am not a watch connoisseur by any stretch, but I know enough to recognize a $12,000 timepiece when it's flashed in my face. My mom gasped and complimented it. Chloe chimed in, saying Julian had worked so hard and deserved to treat himself. Nobody asked how he afforded a $12,000 watch when interest rates were killing the housing market. I quietly ate my mashed potatoes and kept my mouth firmly shut. That is the ecosystem of my family. One son's lavish spending is never questioned, and the other son's quiet observation is mistaken for apathy. The nightmare officially started exactly 4 months ago. My dad called me on a Tuesday evening at 8 p.m. This was immediately a massive red flag. Dad never initiates calls. Mom calls. Dad occasionally yells a greeting from the background. That is the established system. "Hey, Nathan," he said. His voice had this careful, walking on eggshells tremble to it that instantly made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Got a quick question for you. Kind of an administrative thing." "Sure, Dad. What's up?" I asked, setting down my coffee mug. "When you were over here for Mother's Day a few weeks ago, did you happen to use my computer? The desktop in the office?" "Yeah," I replied slowly. I checked my work email for about 10 minutes because my phone battery died. Why? A long, agonizing pause. Your mother noticed some money was moved out of one of our savings accounts, and we're just trying to figure out the timeline of when it happened. My stomach did a slow, uncomfortable flip. How much money, Dad? $8,500, he mumbled. I sat, completely frozen, in my kitchen. Dad, are you asking me if I logged into your computer and transferred $8,500 out of your bank account? No, he backpedaled quickly, his voice spiking in panic. We're just trying to figure out what happened. Julian thought maybe, well, Julian thought what? I demanded, my voice dropping an octave. Julian said you asked him about our account a few months ago, about how our online banking was set up. He was just trying to help us trace it, Nathan. He thought maybe you needed a loan and were too proud to ask. I closed my eyes and took a deep, jagged breath. I told my dad, clearly, firmly, and with zero emotion, that I had never asked Julian a single question about their banking. I told him I had not accessed any financial accounts, and I had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. My dad sighed heavily, said he believed me, muttered something about it being a bank error, and hung up. I sat in the dark for 20 minutes, replaying the conversation. It wasn't just the accusation that made me nauseous. It was the meticulous framing. Julian thought maybe. Julian was trying to help trace it. Julian was already controlling the narrative before I was even aware a narrative existed. I almost called Julian right then to scream at him. But my professional instincts kicked in. Something told me to wait. 2 weeks later, I was sitting at my desk at the firm, deep into a corporate embezzlement file, when my cell phone rang. It was an unknown local number. Is this Nathan Pierce? A gruff voice asked. Speaking. Mr. Pierce, this is Detective Harrison with the Denver Police Department, Financial Crimes Division. I'm contacting you regarding a formal theft report that was filed recently. Your name has been explicitly listed as a primary suspect in connection with unauthorized access to a family member's financial account. I need you to come down to the station this week to answer some questions. I felt the entire room tilt violently on its axis. My blood ran completely cold. A theft report? Against me? Can you tell me exactly who filed this report? I can confirm it involves a sworn complaint from an immediate family member regarding wire fraud and unauthorized transfers. I strongly suggest we discuss the details in person, Mr. Pierce. I told him I would be there on Friday. I hung up the phone, walked over to my office door, locked it, and stared blankly at the wall for 5 solid minutes. My brain felt like it was short-circuiting. My coworker, Rachel, a senior partner who has been in the fraud game for 20 years, knocked on the glass. She took one look at my pale face, let herself in, and locked the door behind her. You look like you just got diagnosed with something terminal, she said bluntly. I gave her the short, horrifying version. Rachel listened with her arms crossed, not interrupting once. When I finished, her expression was stone cold. You do not talk to that detective without a plan, Nathan, and you do not walk into that precinct without a lawyer. You are a fraud investigator. You know exactly how fast this can ruin your career. I know, I whispered, rubbing my temples. I spent the next hour sitting at my desk, trying to process the sheer, unadulterated betrayal. My own brother. The kid I taught how to drive. The kid whose rent I secretly paid for 3 months when he was 22, so our parents wouldn't find out he got fired. He had walked into a police precinct and formally accused me of a felony. That afternoon, Rachel connected me with Evelyn Vance, a ruthless, mid-50s former state prosecutor who now worked as a high-end criminal defense attorney. I met with Evelyn on Thursday. I laid out the entire family dynamic, the phone call with my dad, and my complete innocence. If this detective is worth his badge, Evelyn said, adjusting her glasses, the bank's IP logs will tell the whole story. But we are not going to sit around and pray he does his job properly. We are going to force the bank to freeze the data. Evelyn immediately drafted and overnighted illegal preservation holds to my parents' bank, demanding they secure all transaction metadata, IP logs, and device authentication histories for the past 3 years. On Friday morning, I walked into the Denver Police Department wearing a tailored suit. Detective Harrison was a sharp, observant guy in his late 40s. He led Evelyn and me into an interrogation room that smelled faintly of bleach and stale coffee. Harrison opened a thick manila folder. Here is what we are looking at, Mr. Pierce. Your parents, Arthur and Helen Pierce, had approximately $8,500 transferred out of their joint savings account without authorization. The formal police report was filed by your brother, Julian Pierce, acting on their behalf. On their behalf, I repeated, my voice devoid of emotion. Correct. Julian came in personally. He provided a sworn statement that you had access to the household computer during a Mother's Day visit. He stated that you had previously interrogated him about your parents' banking passwords, and that the unauthorized transfer occurred mere days after you were in the house. Evelyn put her hand on my arm, signaling me to stay calm. Detective, I said smoothly, none of that is true. I used the computer to check my Outlook email. I never asked my brother about passwords. I then looked Harrison dead in the eye and dropped the card I had been holding. Detective, I am a senior forensic auditor. I investigate financial fraud for a living. I know exactly how wire transfers are tracked. I can promise you right now, if you subpoena the IP logs and MAC addresses for that transaction, they will not trace back to my phone, my laptop, my home network, or any IP address I have ever been associated with. Harrison paused, his eyebrows rising a fraction of an inch. Forensic auditor, huh? He scribbled something down. That is highly relevant information. We are waiting on the subpoenas to clear the bank's fraud department. I'll be in touch. I walked out of the station feeling like I was going to vomit. It wasn't the fear of going to jail. I knew the digital footprint would clear me. It was the crushing realization that Julian had sat in that exact same room, looked a cop in the face, and deliberately signed a piece of paper meant to destroy my life. I called my mom that night. Mom, I said, my voice shaking slightly, did you and Dad file a police report against me? A long, suffocating silence. Julian handled the bank stuff, Nathan, she finally whispered. He was just so worried about our retirement. He said filing a report was just to create a paper trail so the bank would refund the money. Mom, he filed a report explicitly naming me as the thief. He told the police I stole from you. Nobody is saying you actually stole it, honey, she cried, her voice pitching up in frantic denial. Julian just panicked. You know how protective he gets. He told the detective you asked about the passwords, and maybe he just got confused. He misremembered the conversation. People do not misremember their way into filing a felony police report, Mom, I snapped. Then she said the words that officially killed whatever remaining respect I had for her. Nathan, please, do not ruin this family over one silly mistake. Julian was just trying to help us. Let it go. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I realized in that exact second that my mother had already rewritten reality to protect her golden child. Okay, Mom, I said coldly. I hear you. And I hung up. Update 1. Here is where my profession stops being a neat background detail and becomes the entire weapon. The first thing Evelyn did was file a public records request for the original police report Julian submitted. It took 5 agonizing days to arrive. When I finally held it in my hands, I read it 4 times. Julian's statement was a masterpiece of fiction. It was terrifyingly detailed. He described a fake conversation we supposedly had in my parents' kitchen, claiming I asked if they used 2-factor authentication. But then my eyes hit the supplemental notes section at the bottom of page 3, a section Julian likely didn't realize I would ever see. The report listed the immediate theft amount as $8,500, but the bank's fraud flag noted a total suspected historical loss of $62,000. I stared at that number until my vision blurred. $62,000. My parents are not rich. My dad's modest pension and my mom's retirement savings are all they have to survive on. $62,000 was a catastrophic, life-altering loss for them, and Julian had only reported the $8,500. Why? Because the $8,500 was a massive, sloppy withdrawal that triggered an alert my dad actually saw. The rest of the $62,000 had been quietly bleeding out of their accounts in smaller, unnoticeable increments over a massive timeline. Julian was trying to pin the big, noticeable theft on me to satisfy our parents, while keeping the cops away from the historical data. I couldn't legally access my parents' bank records myself, but Evelyn's preservation letter ensured the police would get them eventually. I needed to build an ironclad defense before that happened. I spent the next 4 nights awake until 3 a.m. at my kitchen island. I pulled every single email, calendar entry, text message, flight itinerary, and hotel receipt I had for the past 3 years. I built a massive, color-coded spreadsheet documenting my exact geolocation for every single day over a 36-month period. Then came the hardest part of my entire life, the waiting game. Evelyn gave me strict, non-negotiable orders. You need to be the most boring, predictable human being on the planet for the next 6 weeks, she commanded. Do not confront Julian. Do not yell at your parents. Do not post passive-aggressive quotes on Facebook. You act perfectly normal. Let Julian think he won. Let him get comfortable. So I did. I subjected myself to psychological torture. I went to work, I audited client files, I went to the gym, and every other Sunday, I called my mother and talked about the weather, her garden, and Dad's cholesterol. I could hear the immense relief in her voice every time I didn't bring up the police report. She was ecstatic that her strategy of ignoring the problem was working. During this time, Julian texted me 3 times. One was a link to a Denver Broncos article. Another was a picture of him and Chloe drinking margaritas on a patio. Just a guy being a guy, a brother checking in. I didn't reply to any of them, but the sheer sociopathy required to try and send me to federal prison on a Friday and text me about football on a Tuesday made my blood run cold. 7 weeks into the investigation, Evelyn called me into her office. The bank finally complied with the police subpoenas, she said, sliding a massive stack of papers across her mahogany desk. Detective Harrison allowed me to review the discovery files informally. Nathan, every single flag transaction over the past 3 years traces back to an IP address registered to Julian's home router in Boulder. Several of the transfers were authenticated using Julian's specific cellular MAC address. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 2 months. What about the routing? That's where it gets interesting, Evelyn smirked. The money didn't just go to Julian's credit cards. The vast majority of the $62,000 was routed through a third-party payment processor into a shell LLC. She flipped to a highlighted page. An LLC registered to Chloe Pierce. My jaw practically unhinged. Chloe. It wasn't just Julian stealing to fund his Porsche. Chloe was actively siphoning my parents' retirement money to artificially float her failing luxury boutique, washing the stolen cash through her business accounts to make it look like legitimate revenue. They were in on it together. Furthermore, Evelyn continued, tapping her pen on the desk, Harrison cross-referenced the transaction dates with the travel timeline you provided us. On 14 of the dates when money was transferred from your parents' account via a local IP, you were physically out of state on corporate audits. We have the flight manifests and hotel receipts to prove it. You are entirely cleared, Nathan. You are no longer a suspect. So, what happens now? I asked, my heart pounding against my ribs. Now? Evelyn smiled sharply. We let the detective do his job. And we wait for the perfect moment. Update 2. The perfect moment arrived 3 days later, wrapped in a bow of absolute irony. Julian called me on a Thursday afternoon. His voice was bright, warm, and dripping with fake affection. Hey man, so Mom and Dad's 40th wedding anniversary is this Saturday. Chloe and I are hosting a private dinner for them at that high-end steakhouse downtown. Just the 6 of us. Mom really, really wants you there. He paused, lowering his voice into a tone of manufactured vulnerability. Look, I know things got a little weird with the bank stuff lately. Let's just put it all behind us, okay? Fresh start. For Mom and Dad. Fresh start. Like he hadn't tried to ruin my career. Like he hadn't stolen $62,000 from the people who gave him everything. Sure, Julian, I said smoothly, staring at the forensic file on my desk. Saturday works for me. I wouldn't miss it for the world. I immediately called Evelyn. I need Detective Harrison to have my complete forensic analysis and the travel logs by tomorrow morning. I want this locked in before Saturday night. Evelyn personally hand-delivered my 40-page, meticulously organized forensic reconstruction to Detective Harrison on Friday morning. She told me Harrison was practically speechless at the level of detail. I had done the police department's job for them, wrapping a slam-dunk felony fraud and false reporting case in a neat little bow. Saturday night arrived. I walked into the upscale downtown steakhouse. The ambiance was all low lighting, clinking crystal, and expensive jazz. Julian and Chloe were already seated at a massive corner booth, looking like $1 million. Chloe was wearing a designer dress that my parents had unknowingly paid for. Nathan, you made it! Julian stood up and pulled me into a tight, brotherly hug. I patted his back, feeling completely detached from my own body. My parents arrived shortly after. My mom hugged me so tightly she was shaking. She was just so desperately happy that her boys were sitting at the same table, pretending everything was fine. My dad ordered a nice bottle of wine. We ate $100 steaks. We laughed. Julian held court, telling hilarious stories about his wealthy real estate clients. He was charming, magnetic, and completely in his element. Chloe held my mom's hand and talked about how much she cherished family. I sat there, eating my food, nodding and smiling. I looked at my dad, who was laughing at one of Julian's jokes, completely unaware that his favorite son had financially gutted him. I didn't do it to be cruel. I did it because I knew it was the very last time the six of us would ever sit at a table together, and my dad deserved one last peaceful dinner. At 10 p.m., we all hugged in the parking lot. Julian slapped my shoulder. "Great night, man. Glad we got past the weirdness." "Me too, Julian," I said, looking him dead in the eyes. "Have a good night." On Monday morning at 9 a.m., Detective Harrison called Julian and asked him to come down to the precinct to finalize some paperwork regarding the theft report. Evelyn got the full breakdown of the interrogation from the prosecutor later that week. Julian strutted into the precinct, completely arrogant, assuming he was there to sign off on my impending arrest. Harrison asked him to verify his original sworn statement. Julian confidently repeated his lies. Then, Harrison opened the folder. Harrison showed Julian the IP logs. He showed him the MAC address verifications. He showed him the flight manifests, proving I was in Chicago and Dallas when the money was moved. And finally, Harrison pulled out the bank routing numbers linking the stolen $62,000 directly to Chloe's Boutique, LLC. Julian's face completely drained of blood. He immediately demanded a lawyer. But the best part? The absolute cherry on top? The second Julian realized he was facing serious federal wire fraud charges, he instantly threw his wife under the bus. He told the detective that the $62,000 was entirely Chloe's idea, that she had stolen his phone to make the transfers, and that she was the one who drafted the fake police report. By Wednesday, the Denver PD officially closed the investigation into me. On Thursday, they formally indicted Julian and Chloe on multiple counts of felony theft, wire fraud, and filing a false police report. When the news broke, my family imploded with the force of a dying star. My mom called me absolutely hysterical, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. "Nathan, the police arrested Julian. They're saying he stole $60,000. You have to help him. Tell them it's a mistake." "It's not a mistake, Mom," I said quietly, standing in my kitchen. "I saw the bank records. Julian has been draining your retirement for 3 years to fund Chloe's business and his car. And when Dad noticed, Julian tried to send me to prison to cover his tracks." She dropped the phone. I could hear her wailing in the background. I hung up. The fallout over the next few months was apocalyptic. Julian and Chloe turned on each other like rabid dogs. Chloe filed for divorce to try and distance herself from the criminal charges, claiming Julian was financially abusive and forced her to take the money. Julian's high-end real estate brokerage fired him immediately when the fraud charges became public. Because the money was stolen from a joint family account, the theft charges got legally messy. But the charge for filing a false police report was a dead-to-rights felony. Julian ultimately took a plea deal to avoid prison time. He was convicted of a high-level misdemeanor for the theft and a felony for the false report. He got 3 years of strict probation, 500 hours of community service, and a court-ordered restitution mandate to pay my parents back every single cent of the $62,000. Chloe's boutique went bankrupt, and she moved back in with her parents in Ohio. My relationship with my parents is fundamentally fractured, but we are slowly rebuilding something new. My mom is in intense weekly therapy. She has aged 10 years in the last 6 months. The illusion of her perfect golden child was violently shattered, and she is struggling to cope with the reality of who Julian actually is. But the moment that finally brought me peace happened last month. My dad called me. He didn't sound like the passive, quiet man I grew up with. He sounded broken, but resolute. "Nathan," he said, his voice cracking, "I owe you the biggest apology a father can give a son. I should have never, ever questioned your integrity. When that money went missing, I should have known in my soul that you wouldn't do it. I let your mother's favoritism blind me, and I left you to fight for your life alone. I failed you. I am so, so deeply sorry." I stood in my living room, staring out at the Denver skyline, and for the first time in my entire life, I started to cry. "Thank you, Dad," I choked out. That's all I ever wanted to hear. I am doing great now. I got promoted to lead auditor at my firm. I sleep peacefully every single night. Julian is currently working at a budget rental car kiosk at the airport to afford his court-ordered restitution payments. He tried to call me once, a few weeks after his sentencing. He left a voicemail, crying, asking how I could be so ruthless to my own flesh and blood. I didn't call him back. I just deleted the voicemail and went back to work. After all, I didn't ruin his life. I just followed the money.